Hey everyone, you should know how to create 2D maps and 3D models from drones. Welcome, my name is Paul and this is Drone U HQ. I hope that you get a lot of information about this video, and what are we gonna go over? We're gonna go over what is the workflow of mapping, what do you need to know, and what do you need to understand? Because there's so many videos out there that just make it look like, as drone pilots, we are battery babysitters by clicking go and letting drone deploy do its thing. Unfortunately, that ideology might get more people in trouble than it does actually solve problems. So I hope that you realize this video is taught from experience. We're gonna be going over what it takes to actually create 2D maps, 3D models. We're gonna go over deliverables, and we're gonna go over different drones to get the job done. We're also gonna go over which drones are capable that are Chinese and which that are domestically approved, because there are a lot of options out there for you today. Look, let's be honest, let's be real. Technical drone deliverables are going to pay better, but there are a lot of things, and take it from me, I have learned the hard way. I've learned what I didn't know and what I didn't know that I didn't know about drone mapping. So when we talk about drone mapping, what are we talking about? We're talking about photogrammetry. Just think of it as the science of using trigonometry to measure distances in imagery. It's actually been around since about 1867, and yes, like many other modern inventions, it was invented out of the necessity for war. Yes, I know, woof. Anyway, let's get into the nitty-gritty of drone mapping. When you think of drone mapping, think of measuring from images. But in order to actually create beautiful drone maps and models, you have to know about map quality. Okay, the quality of your map is going to be determined on three factors: the size of the imaging sensor or camera sensor, the altitude that you fly, and the focal length of the camera. Whenever you look at a map's quality, a lot of people look at camera quality and how many megapixels. That's not always true, because you need to determine the true size of the camera sensor. When it comes to drone mapping, we measure map quality in ground sampling distance, okay? And that's those three factors I just mentioned, which is camera size, focal length, and the altitude that you fly. So the higher that you fly, the lower quality map that you have, because the higher that you fly, you might have like a 2-inch or a 3-inch ground sampling distance. When we talk about ground sampling distance, literally imagine 2 pixels adjacent to one another, and we are taking a measurement from the center point of those 2 pixels and measuring between them and essentially normalize for real world dimensions, and that is our actual ground sampling distance. Now I will say, the old mapping powerhouse used to be the Phantom 4 Pro version 2. I would argue that it still is in most cases, but now the Mavic 3 Enterprise has become the new mapping standard when it comes to creating drone maps and models. What you'll find is that this drone has a 1-inch sensor, which if you fly about, let's say 20 acres, might take about 11 or 12 minutes. With this is a micro 4/3 sensor flying at the exact same altitude. The mission will only take about 6 minutes. Although one of the biggest mistakes that new drone mappers make is once they start to run a mission in DJI Pilot 2, they forget to click dewarping on before they start running the mission. There's your first tip and trick for drone mapping. So typically when we are doing drone mapping, our drone needs to fly in a very autonomous method. And the reason that we have to fly an autonomous method is that in order to recreate scenes and environments or create those digital twins, we have to have a very high level of overlap in our imagery. The reason that we need to do that is very simple. It's the same fallacy that we have as humans. What is that? Well, we only have 2 eyes, right? So if I'm looking at the camera, or you're looking at that camera and you're looking at me, the position that I seem to be can change depending on the perspective that I'm essentially speaking from. So again, that perspective can change depending upon where I'm standing and where the camera is looking. We essentially call this parallax, which is the object that you're looking at can look like it's in a different place depending on where you're looking from. Now, because we only have 2 eyes, we can't measure distances very well. So think about this, how far away, just look, take your nearest wall, right? You're watching this video on a computer, look at the nearest wall. How far away is that wall? It doesn't matter your answer because I can prove the point right here, okay? Let's say that wall you're looking at, maybe it's 8 feet away. Well, maybe the wall's 20 feet away. Maybe the wall's 14 feet away. How far away is the wall for you? Now notice how you answered the question. You probably answered the question in whole numbers, meaning 12 feet, 14 feet, 16 feet, 20 feet, 22 feet, 23 feet, okay? That showcases what we call your ellipsoid error, or your incapacity to accurately measure distances with just 2 points of view, okay? That wall, let's say that your wall is approximately 8 feet away, but you didn't answer the question in 7 feet, 8 inches, and 3/8. Why? You only have 2 eyes. This is why we need such a high level of overlap when we're flying these single grid or double grid missions to create these 2D maps and 3D models. So, why do we have these high levels of overlap? Because of what we call parallax, which means we need a lot of photos to recreate an area. Typically, if you ever fly a mapping mission, you're gonna have an acquisition plan. This acquisition plan is going to show you the mapping area that you need to fly. Be careful because the different processing engines and different softwares, some will call this a mapping area, some people will call it a processing area. The difference is very real. You can learn more about that in my comprehensive mapping course because I don't have 32 hours to explain this all to you. Okay, moving on. Now, whenever you fly those missions, it's typically going to ask you, do you want to fly a 75-75, 75-80? What do you want to fly? They're talking about the overlap because whenever you fly these missions, you're going to need a frontal overlap and you're going to need a side overlap. Typically, the gold standard whenever you're recreating a digital scene is going to be a 75-75 overlap. But that only takes us about halfway into our acquisition plan because we also have to factor on the gimbal tilt. Okay, the gimbal tilt angle. Here's a perfect example. We have our Phantom 4, okay? Now, if I'm flying a mission and my camera is at nadir, no, Bill, English is not nadir. We are not French. I hope you watch this video and get a laugh out of that. Okay, with nadir imagery, our camera is plumb to the ground. If we want to create the most accurate ortho mosaics, we want to have that nadir camera orientation. That's going to provide us with the best bare earth model possible. It's going to reduce much of the distortion and create the most accurate representation of what's on the ground. But we still haven't even talked about accuracies because there's 2 types of accuracy. Absolute accuracy, meaning you know your building is in the real world and how close to the real world does it actually show up. And then there's relative accuracy, meaning let's say I'm creating a map of this Phantom and I know that from motor center to motor center is 950 millimeters and I measure it in my map and it comes up of 949, then I know I have a high degree of relative accuracy, okay? So whenever you're flying mapping missions, it's gonna be an acquisition pattern, typically 75-75 overlap to cover the front and side lap. You're also gonna have that gimbal tilt angle. Most orthomosaic based missions, it's going to require a nadir camera orientation. But if you wanna create better 3D models and you wanna see more of the facades of walls, then typically you're going to have a gimbal offset, typically 70 degrees. Now DJI calls it negative 70 degrees because they like confusing you and making you learn new things as to reduce the amount of competition that you truly have. Great job, DJI. So when it comes to creating 2D maps from drones, we have to fly an autonomous mission. We have to essentially pick our altitude based off of the quality of the map that we want to have. And what I want to get into next is that there's really 3 types of mapping software. These get confused all the time. I don't want you to get confused, okay? Number 1 type of mapping software is acquisition software. This is the software that controls the drone to fly those perfectly straight lines to make sure that you get enough data to accurately reconstruct the environment that you are flying to make sure it's got the right location, the right orientation, and the right scale. Okay, but it's also important to know that you can only map what you can see. It's not what you can see, it's what the drone can see. Okay, so if we're mapping this room, we would want to make sure that we have, say, at least 5 images of every single corner to make sure that it shows up in our map. The acquisition software that we use is going to help us do that, but it's not always sufficient. With these older Phantom 4 Pro version 2s, there was a huge amount of third-party softwares that would help you create really beautiful lifelike 3D models and really beautiful 2D accurate maps. But since DJI has moved away from supporting the very people that made their drones popular and now supporting only DJI Pilot 2, you'll find we have a don't crash course on the Mavic 3 Enterprise, and I go over how to hack this drone to literally get the best mapping missions possible, because the oblique mission is a joke. And we show you some hacks to just take a single grid and essentially duplicate that mission, change the course angle 90 degrees, set a custom tilt angle, and that way you don't waste a bunch of time out in the field with DJI's lackluster piloting and autonomous software. So we went from having a software suite where we could choose whatever acquisition app that we wanted to essentially being stuck to a few limited options with the Mavic 3 Enterprise. I know other YouTubers came out of the gates firing of how great this is a mapping drone when it first came out. And if you would have installed any of those apps on your drones, you would have learned the hard way that you would have bricked your drone. We installed Drone Deploy a couple months after this came out and it bricked our drone. Now it works fine. Same thing with Pix4D Capture Pro. So we've kind of gone from this environment of lots of choices and options to limited choices. That's okay. But when it comes to software, we're talking about acquisition apps. The next type of software that you should be aware of is called desktop processing software. This is going to be software like Pix4D Capture, Bentley's Context Capture. Those are software programs that work on a powerful desktop machine. You need a really hefty computer, high-grade GPU to actually crunch lots of photos, thousands of photos, to create lifelike models and 2D maps. Now, the benefit of desktop processing software: number one, you can control how your data is processed. Number two, you can manipulate the data. You can delete points, you can rearrange points, you can categorize and classify points. You have a lot more flexibility to create more complex 3D models and better 2D maps. The last type of acquisition software that we're gonna talk about is cloud-based software. This is like, it's also an all-in-one, I'll call it, an all-in-one cloud-based software. In all honesty, this is your Drone Deploy. Okay, this is your Propeller Arrow. There's a lot of options out there. Measure, another option. And Measure's flight management is really great, but it's important to understand that there's acquisition apps, processing apps, cloud apps. Cloud apps are typically the way that most drone pilots go. If you watch just about any other drone mapping video on YouTube, everyone's gonna be talking about Drone Deploy. They just make it so easy, or Measure, or any other cloud-based software. Now, cloud-based software is great because you have one central hub to manage your data. Cloud software is great because it makes it easier to share data with your clients. Cloud software sucks because you cannot control how your data is processed. You have limited means, if any means at all, of manipulating and editing your data. And if your data is broken and it doesn't work, well, guess what? You're screwed. Battery babysitting didn't pay off, or those YouTube videos didn't pay off either. Which is why it's so important to understand a couple of things. We teach a comprehensive mapping course here at DroneU, and we teach primarily on Pix4D Mapper. We also teach on Drone Deploy. We also teach on Pix4D React. We also teach on something called Optelos. Now, we'll be moving into other softwares here recently too, like Capture Reality. But what's important to know is the reason that we teach on Pix4D Mapper is because you can create the largest amount of deliverables possible and work through that workflow so that you understand the steps of photogrammetry. It is not just flying your drone in a nice simple pattern to create this nice, reconstruction. Typically, you have to make sure that your map is accurate. And the way that we do that is typically we utilize some sort of ground control point. These are like targets on the ground. And these targets on the ground typically have two unique parts to them. One is a target that can be seen from the drone, so it makes it easy to mark that position in your map to geo-reference your map or give it an absolute accuracy. Okay, the second part is the actual GPS unit. Now there's two types of units that are very common. One is an RTK rover, much like the Reach RS2. We prefer the Trimble DA2 as it comes in under $500 and it costs about $11 per mapping job to actually process those RTK points. But to keep this short, you're gonna need cellular service, you're gonna need a pretty close proximity to what we call a CORS tower, continually operating reference station, and you're also gonna need access to what we call a VRS or a virtual reference station. Now, RTK works great in that you get your points right away. But a more common, simple solution are these propeller arrow points. I would like to demonstrate just how difficult these are to use because honestly, it does take a little bit of rocket science to be able to understand how these work to take your map, which you might think is at 5,000 feet, but actually it's at 4,889. That's what these are gonna do. So let me demonstrate the difficulty in using these. Okay, it's on. I know, very hard. We let these lay out on the ground for about 45 minutes and they collect data. And then that data is magically sent up to the cloud. It's corrected at Opus, and then we get that corrected data and we take our drone map and we tie our ground control points in. And typically you'll find that your map is gonna move a significant distance in elevation. This is how we create accurate maps. Okay, I've really gone down the rabbit hole on GPS. And again, I'm trying to whittle a 32-hour class down into 20 minutes and I'm not doing a good job. So let's talk about the best drones for drone mapping. When it comes to DJI, if you can fly Chinese drones, which they are superior aircraft, the Mavic 3 Enterprise is the way to go. You will be mapping with DJI Pilot 2. You can use things like Drone Deploy, that all-in-one software. You can download the APK file from the Google Play or Amazon store, load it on there, do all that. You don't have to do that. You can just use DJI Pilot 2. You don't have to buy software to actually create these maps and models. The old legacy drone that was the powerhouse was the Phantom 4 Pro version 2. Now, if you cannot fly DJI, then I am going to argue that the best mapping drone made by domestic manufacturers that is available today and that makes drone mapping missions a lot more efficient is going to be the FreeFly Astro drone. That drone can carry a 60 megapixel Sony camera, which means you don't have to fly as high and you get jobs done a lot faster. Now, the FreeFly Astro has great acquisition software built right into the drone, and it has a significant flight time, unlike other domestic competitors like the Sony AirPeak. The Parrot Anafi is another great solution if you need to go domestic, Anafi AI. It's just that you're working with a linear rolling shutter, and so you're not gonna get the most accurate results. And as I proved on Instagram, I actually compared a Parrot Anafi AI to the Phantom. The Phantom to process an ortho in Pix4D Mapper took 36 minutes with 100 photos. Parrot Anafi AI took 2.5 hours because of that linear rolling shutter. It's just not that efficient. Great drone though, if you can't afford a FreeFly Astro. Now, a lot of people ask me, Paul, I wanna map large areas. What's the best way to do that? I would like to introduce the Wingtra 1 Gen 2. This is a fixed wing mapping drone that has vertical takeoff and landing. It also carries Sony's smallest full frame sensor and can carry other multispectral sensors as well. The beauty of the Wingtra 1 Gen 2 is that Wingtra has its own PPK based GPS. PPK is post-processed kinematic GPS. It's exactly what the arrow points are, is post-processed. You don't need a live cellular connection. You can do this out in the boonies or rural areas. And Wingtra has really nailed fast, efficient, accurate mapping, because to map 400 acres with a Phantom would take about 8 to 9 hours. To do it with a Mavic 3 Enterprise would take about 5 or 6 hours. To do 400 acres with the Wingtra 1 and have highly accurate imagery through Wingtra 1's hub, it's gonna take about 47 minutes. So as you can see, it's an efficiency of scale. It's just that, let's be honest, Wingtra, the 3D data is not nearly as good as the 2D data. And that's only because those cameras fly at a fixed position. They're at that nadir tilt. They can't tilt up to get that good facade or wall data. Let's talk about common deliverables, and then we're gonna go into different drone mapping deliverables based on industry. So number one is the orthomosaic. This is your traditional 2D map. A lot of you have seen orthomosaics on Google Maps. And this brings up the question, Paul, why don't I just use Google Earth Pro to create really detailed, accurate 2D maps? Well, thanks to the Department of Defense, those maps can only have a quality of 25 centimeters of ground sampling distance. If 1 centimeter equals 2.54 inches, then you can see that's about 1.5 feet error. So if you want to take measurements plus or minus 3 feet, well, good luck to you, sir. I wish you the best of luck. Now, with drone maps and models, we can literally get down to 1 inch, maybe even less, depending on the circumstances. But it's important to understand that you're never gonna get that level of accuracy with just a drone. You will need some sort of ground control points to tie that map down to actually make it as accurate as possible. The next deliverable that we'll talk about is a point cloud. Now, a point cloud is essentially when the software has identified unique points in multiple photos, okay? So let's say that we are mapping this desk and we have flown a single grid over it and we see this knot in this wood and we see it in 3 or 4 images. The software is gonna say, hey, I know that that knot of wood is unique based off of its contrast, white balance, and a couple other features. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take these multiple points from various photos and I'm gonna create those 2D points into a 3D point. Every 3D point or point cloud has typically 4 data points to it: X, Y, Z, and color. X is gonna be like essentially X and Y are like your laterals, your longitude, your latitude, and then Z, or Z as our famous Canadian friends like to say, is essentially going to be your elevation, okay? So point clouds are great because that's going to be a digital twin or a digital representation of the environment that you're trying to map. Don't confuse a point cloud with a 3D textured mesh. Now you're gonna understand why we have this new cool backdrop. This new cool backdrop is a subconscious methodology of showcasing to you that we really love data. This is actually a perfect rendition of a 3D textured mesh, because a 3D textured mesh is going to essentially draw triangles. Okay, here's a triangle, 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 triangle. It's gonna draw triangles between all these points. And then it's gonna use the adjacent point color to fill in the gaps between the points. The 3D textured mesh, that's our lifelike 3D model. That's essentially what we can show to our clients, what we can upload to Google Poly, to Sketchfab, to Kula, and showcase our really cool lifelike 3D models. Digital surface model. This is an important one to understand. A digital surface model is going to be essentially a 2D map that every point is going to showcase a point of elevation. With a digital surface model, things like homes, trees, and other man-made objects are going to show up in the digital surface model, which makes it different from a digital terrain model. A digital terrain model is essentially like a bare earth model where we remove trees, we remove houses, we remove all this other stuff to create a very accurate bare earth model. Now, if you've seen that really cool video from Indiana Drones, which, what a cool name, you'll see that he actually said he made $45,000 in a day creating a topo from a digital terrain model made from LiDAR, which brings up an important question. When would you use LiDAR versus using photogrammetry? Photogrammetry is a passive technology, okay? We're not shooting laser beams, okay, to actually measure distances. We are capturing photos and measuring objects from those photos based off of the tilt of our camera, the position of our camera, and the elevation of our camera, and many other factors. With LiDAR, it's an active technology, so it is shooting laser beams down to the ground. Now, typically it's shooting thousands of lasers all the time, okay? Shot, 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 shot. You're gonna get lots of returns to the camera that say, hey, this is actually how far away this thing is. It's typically the 4th, 5th, and 6th return that penetrates vegetation. which means that if you live in a densely vegetated area, AKA anywhere on the East Coast, then photogrammetry may not always be the best option for you because it cannot penetrate vegetation. Whereas LiDAR can. LiDAR is going to penetrate to the ground. You can remove all the trees and create a beautiful digital terrain model to create a topographical map, like the maps you see on all trails for hiking and whatnot. So you can get a basic understanding of terrain and whatnot. All right, we've talked about different softwares. We've talked about deliverables. We've talked about drones. We've talked about how we can create these different things. Let's talk about the best mapping softwares, okay? If you want to create the most accurate 2D maps, and if you want to create the most deliverables, meaning an ortho, DSM, DTM, linear measurements, you want to do a video animation tool, you want to create cool hyperlapses of areas like this one here, guess what? That's going to be Pix4D Mapper. That is a desktop-based processing solution. The cool thing about Pix4D Mapper, and I don't think this has ever made it out in any of my previous podcasts, is you can actually set up how you want the map or model to be processed and then send it up to Pix4D's cloud and they will process it for you, which is a super hack because then you get the best of both worlds between cloud and desktop-based processing. Now, let's talk about the best online cloud-based photogrammetric engine. Drone Deploy, Mike, you won my heart at the FAA Symposium, and you guys have done incredible jobs of creating beautiful maps and models. It's important to note with Drone Deploy, it is a cloud-based service, so you have very limited control on how your data is processed. But thanks to some machine learning, they've been able to actually identify different types of acquisition strategies, and they've been able to essentially get you the best deliverable from those. It's not always the best, and honestly though, most of the time it's very good because you can easily organize all of your data deliverables. You can also easily send out those data deliverables as well. Now, Drone Deploy is the very best photogrammetric software for doing volumetric measurements. So if you've got a quarry that you like to visit once a week for a nice handy $1,000 and you're gonna actually measure the different piles and whatnot, with Drone Deploy, you can actually set the material density because we know that rock is a different density than sand, which is a different density than sub-aggregate sand, which is a different density than just the dirt in your backyard or the compost that you literally put over your grass to get a nice, lush, green backyard. Drone Deploy, the best for volumetric measurements. Also, Drone Deploy has done a very good job of incorporating different types of media into their maps and models. Things like 360 images from above, but also incorporating things like Struction Site, which is essentially like a Matterport for interior 3D models as well. Okay, let's talk about the very best orthomosaic software. In my humble opinion, it is Pix4D React. Here's why. A lot of people know drone mapping for construction, and drone mapping is used in construction a lot. But if you want to crush the competition and go steal the jobs from under them right away, it's very easy and simple. Why? Most construction sites, they use Drone Deploy, Measure, some use Pix4D. Okay, what you can do is you can fly a single grid nadir camera orientation because Pix4D React only works with single grid nadir camera orientation. And you can actually, before you leave the site, create a 2D orthomosaic map and give it to the client. Most of the construction guys that I know, bless your heart, I love you all, they deliver within 24 to 48 hours. With Pix4D React, you can fly in about 10 to 30 minutes and you can produce your output in about 10, I've never gone over 15 minutes, so 10 to 15 minutes with Pix4D React. Also, it does not require internet, which is why I recommended it over Drone Deploy, because Drone Deploy's orthomosaics, in all honesty, if you have internet access, Drone Deploy creates much more accurate 2D orthomosaics. Something that's important to note no matter what software that you use is you cannot determine true accuracy within said software. Okay, so if I'm in Drone Deploy, I'm in Pix4D, I'm in Capture Reality, Reality Capture, whatever name they choose, and it's gonna tell you an RMS error, or root mean square error, essentially how far off from known points or how far off is your map from the real world position that it's in. Pix4D oftentimes will be like 0.001, and that's really, really good, but you're not really gonna be able to discern true accuracy unless you put that map and model into another software like Virtual Mapper, Global Mapper, Esri's service, ArcGIS, QGIS, and that's gonna give you an actual accuracy. But it's important as drone pilots, unless you have a surveying license, you really should never tell your clients what accuracy it is. If they want to know, hand them the quality report from whatever software that you're using and say, you can determine the accuracy on your own, but here's all the data that you're going to need, and here's the GPS equipment that I use in order to gather that accuracy. This particular subject has gotten a lot of pilots in trouble, myself included, and so it's very important to understand what you are talking about. Geospatial intelligence, geospatial sciences is a very, very complex thing. If you can't answer questions like, should I use the orthometric height or the geoid 12B height or just the regular WGS 84 height, chances are probably shouldn't be mapping. The good news is you can learn all this stuff. It's actually very valuable to have that information and that knowledge and whatnot. So going back to softwares, if you wanna make the most lifelike, beautiful 3D models, then you gotta check out Capture Reality or Reality Capture, whichever name they choose. It is also a pay per token service, so you don't actually need to pay for the service to create maps and models. You only have to pay for it if you export your data deliverables. So what's the best software for complex infrastructure? Things like little small power lines, power substations, cell phone towers, because there really is no Zillow of cell phone towers. Those coverage maps that you get from your cellular carrier, those are guesstimates. Those are not accurate whatsoever. But thanks to companies like Optelos, who are creating exactly that, just in widespread, essential map of all the cell phone towers in the entire country. And in all honesty, they use Bentley's context capture engine. So for a very reduced price, you can get access to Bentley's engine. And as you'll see here, if we look at a cell phone tower that's literally right here, if you look at the Pix4D version versus the Optelos version, you're gonna understand very, very quickly why Optelos is superior. That 3D textured mesh is just so much better. Understanding geotagging of assets is so much better. Being able to read barcodes on those big antennas, so much better. It's honestly not even comparable. There is Pix4D Inspect, but it's not something that I can sit here and honestly recommend to you. Optelos is superior in just about every way. That's essentially a very wide gamut of the different photogrammetric softwares that you can use to create drone maps and drone models. A lot of this information may sound daunting. It's not. Just, you're gonna have to practice the workflow. The workflow of drone mapping is simple. Go out, find your site, survey your site, make sure your airspace is good. Measure your MoCA. If you don't know what MoCA is, take the comprehensive mapping class. Once you measure MoCA and you set up your mission, your acquisition plan, how high am I gonna fly? What area am I gonna fly? What camera tilt am I gonna fly? I'm gonna set the white balance, and if I'm flying a Mavic 3 Enterprise, I'm not gonna forget that the camera's in manual focus and that I need to turn de-warping on. All the things you learn here at Drone U. Once we have that acquisition plan, we actually fly, and then we take our photos. We typically organize those photos. That's one of the massive benefits of the Mavic 3 Enterprise, is that you get a new folder every single time you create a map and mission, which is awesome. So once you get those photos, you process those photos. You can process them on a desktop or a cloud service. Then you interpret that data, and then you send it to the client. In a gist, that is the workflow of drone mapping. So let's talk about why this is so valuable for clients and companies. First of all, I hope that you understand this class is taught from experience. With this level of complexity, you are going to need to learn things that are very applicable. Otherwise, you're gonna go to these $40,000 mapping classes at a traditional university only to realize that the professor hasn't done that many maps and really doesn't understand the intricacies of going from one area to the next to get these mapping missions done. Now, when mapping missions pay a lot more than just shooting photos and videos, you'll quickly understand why everyone wants to get into drone mapping. It's a set of guidelines. It's not subjective. There's very clear-cut guidelines on map quality, accuracies, what type of accuracies. And yeah, it's a lot of information, but it's extremely valuable to be able to get this digital twin of any given site. So let's talk about the different industries and why drone data, especially drone mapping, is so valuable to them. Let's talk about construction mapping. Look, Construction projects need to stay on time. If I pay a concrete contractor to pour 2,000 cubic yards of concrete every single day for a total of 50,000 yards, every single day we can fly that area and actually measure how much concrete was poured on any given day. If we find that only 1,560 cubic yards were poured on any given day, that means our project is not going to be on time. For any construction client, that could equate to anywhere from $10,000 to $1 million per day in delayed regulatory costs, labor costs, OSHA compliance costs, and we just go down the line. So we can also audit materials. This is something that we did for a construction company that we trained. We essentially found out that one of their aggregate providers was actually skimming off the top of every single truck. When we measured how much material they had versus how much they ordered, they realized that our $3,500 mapping job had just paid for itself twofold. Construction projects can also be used for marketing. I love creating complex 3D models, and the Colorado Convention Center was by far the hardest 3D model that I've ever created. And I tried every single mapping engine to create the 3D model, and the only one that I could get to work was Pix4D Mapper, because I had to create almost 26 manual tie points around the entire building, marking about 30 photos in each MTP to get everything to stitch, align, and merge together. Whew. Now, what did that turn into? It turned into this beautiful animation, which, as you'll see, this was the animation utilized to essentially showcase how the renovation of the Colorado Convention Center would be done, which if you go down there right now, you can literally see this animation in real life. It's pretty cool. But that said, basic construction deliverables are going to be 2D maps, progression photos, and orbital video. High grade construction clients are going to pay thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars to recreate environments and then do animation over those environments to acquire the next big job. So let's also talk about telecommunications, because this is a big one. Cell phone tower mapping. It's one of our newest classes at DroneU. If you haven't checked it out, it's worth it, because right now, the companies that we work for are hiring and pay anywhere from $250 a tower up to $840 a tower. It does take some time to learn how to map those towers accurately and adequately. But that said, it's one of the best scalable jobs. And the beauty of it is you typically do not have to process the data. But it is absolutely critical to know the relationship of data acquisition and data processing, because crap data in equals crap data out. It's like eating Taco Bell. Everyone always gets the same thing: diarrhea. All right, so moving forward, when we talk about telecommunications, we really need to know and index what antennas are on what towers to be able to discern and cover bandwidth that we need for those cell phone carriers to service their clients, AKA you. When it comes to power utilities, look, we've seen the fires in Paradise, California, all over California. We've seen them in Hawaii. We've seen them all over the country, because our infrastructure is aging, and yet we're pushing, electric vehicles, we're pushing all these new electric things, and our grid literally can't handle it. So in this new infrastructure bill, it's all about building the grid of the future. Part of the infrastructure bill is indexing all these assets, which needs to be done. Some of our largest clients are power utilities, and we are actively training pilots right now to do substation inspections, substation mapping, transmission and distribution mapping, transmission and distribution inspections. Honestly, there is a tiered job flow. Just like any other corporate job, there's going to be the new guys who do basic stuff to the advanced guys that do the advanced stuff. In all honesty, the advanced stuff keeps you on your toes, keeps you challenged, and is a lot more fun and a lot more lucrative. Other industries, my favorite one that I'm gonna go over, because I wanna keep this video clear and concise, because we're gonna do another video about 3D modeling. But my favorite, absolute favorite drone jobs were creating 3D models for films like Netflix's The Harder They Fall, and creating digital twins of that little ghost town that's out in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where they actually utilize that for 3 different departments: the scouting department, okay, the DP, the director of photography, but also in the VFX department, where they could take those digital twins and recreate every single thing that they wanted to in order to recreate that scene. If I were you and I live in California, which I don't, so go for it, or you live in these different areas, It's always a really good idea to go out and map event centers and map filming locations, because you can create that map and 3D model just one time and sell it to multiple clients, because they're all gonna need to take measurements for navigation, logistics, moving assets in, moving assets out, people in, people out, and remote administration of any particular event, even emergency management. So in all honesty, that's gonna be a 3D kind of model. So you're gonna be doing double grids and orbits. You're not really gonna be doing single grids. But when it comes to drone mapping and modeling, just know that this is the ultimate level of data, and data is black gold. Most people don't know what to do with data. It's the people that understand predictive versus prescriptive data analysis, and they can turn these data points into suggestions on how to solve problems in businesses. My point in saying this is that many of us don't really understand the value of data. As soon as you realize what problems can be solved from drone data, you'll realize that the amount of jobs that are out there for drone mapping is almost limitless. The jobs of the future are going to be with drone pilots. You might be flying Phantoms now, but the next thing you know, you'll be flying a Jetson 1 in a few months or a few years or a few decades. Top mistakes for newbies is thinking that you can go out and just fly a mission, have no idea what deliverable you're gonna create, and just use drone deploy and everything is just gonna work. That's not how it works, okay? The lighting, the white balance, composition of photos, it all matters. It's not as simple and easy as you think. Number two biggest issue is that thinking that the accuracy that you get out of your drone is absolutely amazing and is gonna be great, and you can do linear measurements and volumes and areas all based off of just your drone's GPS. Your drone's GPS is about as good as your phone's GPS, which means it's not very good. I've seen error on these Phantoms up to 1,200 feet on the Z-axis before, so understand that even some of the most basic drone mapping applications may require ground control points. Biggest mistake I also see is offering surveying services when you are not a surveyor. Trust me, the states will go after you if you start to offer surveying services. Now, the oxymoron in all of this, or the ironic piece of information in all of this, is that most licensed surveyors are boomers or older. What does this mean? They're having younger guys going out and like taking, elevations, marking points with rovers. They're having all the young guys do this. Well, now they're hiring the young guys to fly drones for them. So when it comes to surveying, don't mention accuracies, don't offer surveying services, and just don't offer surveying. Stay away from it. It's not worth it. So if you really want the ins and the outs of drone mapping, if you really want to learn how to really get the most out of this workflow, understand all the various variables that can impact your data, then you need to take our comprehensive mapping course. I literally had students last week who said they took the competitions course and it was like super shallow and not nearly as comprehensive as our course. Look, competition is great because it drives us all to be better, right? But at the same time, I want to give you everything that you need to know to be the best drone mapper that you can. The only way that I can do that is if I'm experienced in doing it, and not just doing it a few times, but doing it thousands of times. So I hope that you understand this information that you're getting today comes from experience, and like most great things in life, we learn them as apprentices to a true master. I'm not saying that I'm a true master, as there are many people that are out there that are much better than me, but what I can do is give you a comprehensive education on creating 2D maps and 3D models. That said, check out our class at thedroneu.com. We've got a lot of other classes too, like the advanced mapping resources, which goes over how to take your lifelike 3D models and put them on the internet, and how to annotate them and how to get the most out of them. You can even take our roofing inspection course, which utilizes Bentley's context capture to help roofing contractors have permanent record of installation. So when they go install that new Mylar roof and then another contractor breaks a hole through it, they prove that when they finish the job, the roof was absolutely perfect, and now the liability falls on someone else and not them. That's the value of drone data. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments below. I read them all now because, well, I find it very important for the feedback loop. And I greatly appreciate everyone who is here who wants to understand drone mapping and modeling. One of my newest favorite softwares is that Luma Labs or Luma.ai. It's just a video animation tool. You can do that in Pix4D Mapper for free, but honestly, it's an amazing tool to use super small mini drones to create lifelike 3D models. Thanks for joining me today at Drone U HQ.